Good morning, class. This is our final segment together, our final lecture. And it is hurting me that I was not able to talk to you about this in more depth together as a class, because class Mammalia is, well, near and dear to my heart, because my heart is mammalian. Not only that, but it has been a rough time for all of us not seeing each other in classes, but we can console ourselves with the fact that while this will uh, to pass, we will be able to see each other in the fall, nod across a hallway, or even take a class together and know that we have gone through something that will try the hearts of men and survived. That being said, this is an abbreviated discussion of class Mammalia. If you would like to get into a deeper discussion of this awesome class, I would suggest taking a intro um, marine biology class, which are always excellent for this, or a vertebrate zoology class taught by either myself or Professor Degner, or Dr. Degner, I should say. Now, one of the key characteristics of this class is that they have sweat glands, or at least glands in general. They can be either sweat, scent glands, which are sometimes more mysterious than what we would be told, sebaceous glands, and mammary glands, of course. As with the class AVs, we also have a four-chambered heart, and hopefully you have gotten that from our uh, anatomy and physiology section of the class. But if you haven't caught that one quite yet, we do have four chambers, two filling chambers, basically, and two pumping chambers. So our respiratory system has, well, even a voice box, oddly enough, and my kids have definitely proven that. But we have this separation in the esophagus versus the respiratory, and that's kind of important, where we have the epiglottis covering the glottis of the lung system from food. But everything is overemphasized here in order to have a really good communication system going on, both in AVs as well as in class Mammalia, and even more so in class Mammalia, for forming a complex um, language. So, also, if you have not known about this through eighth grade or high school descriptions, we have this internal fertilization. We do not have to have spawning events like frogs, in which we release the eggs, fertilized eggs, or eggs and sperm out into the water. We have sexual reproduction, and we have a uterus that usually holds only one uh, baby at a time, or embryo at a time, and then develops into the fully developed baby on the placental attachment with the uterus. The uterus sometimes can have enough room in it to take up to a number of babies attached to it with their placenta, but usually one is enough for reproduction at one time. Now, of course, the young are usually, outside of technical means, fed by mammary glands, which is one of the major uses of the mammary glands. And of course, we have a highly developed brain. Um, your present professor notwithstanding. Now, when we're talking about class Mammalia, there are two main areas, and I'm going to split it up into. There are huge amounts of animals that I would love to talk about, but I'm going to talk about mostly Monotremata and Marsupila um, as two orders besides ours, because these are interesting orders in general. We have egg layers in Monotremata, and there's a couple, but one of the major ones is the duck-billed platypus, which is an odd mix. When British scientists, or naturalists, they should say, brought these back from Africa, or at least stuffed versions of it. People thought this was an elaborate hoax, having all these parts from different animals glued together. But little did they know that Australia likes to either kill or confuse you. So the duck-billed platypus was actually proved after a while when they brought back a live one. Um, but with order Marsupila, this is where we have the mammals with a pouch, and basically the opossums, kangaroos, koalas, such like that, are examples of that. So we actually have marsupials in North America, for example. So here's the duck-billed platypus. I don't expect you to know the Latin names for this. The opossum or possum is a wonderful example. Some people really don't like them. I think they're really neat. They're, for the most part, completely harmless for us. Some of them die of rabies, but who doesn't? And they have these really cute um, pups, if you will, on them. And they have a little pouch inside them where the young develop. So the monotremes, just to be clear, are laying eggs, but the koalas also have a pouch for development. And basically, when we're talking about the pouch for development, it's kind of like the babies are born early. They are given birth to from the vaginal canal and the uterus, and then they crawl up out of that vaginal canal on their own for the most part, crawl up into the pouch, and then stay in the pouch and feed on mammary glands. So they might not look like a complete nipple or what have you, but at least these tissues that will secrete milk, and they drink it. Um, Depending on the animal, it could be very odd arrangement. Koalas in general, they'll first feed on the milk, and then later on will feed on the partially digested and fecal material of the mother, because that has broken down some of the eucalyptus leaves that are waxy and hard. So they'll have pre-digested food. Not so with the opossum, but there are always differences here. So, monotremes, eggs, pouches for the marsupials. Now, here is a rendition of the duck-billed platypus where you have this tail. It's furred, and that is another characteristic of the mammals, where they have this hair, but it has the fur kind of like a beaver, but its tail is covered. Unlike the beaver, it has these webbed feet for movement. It also has that duck bill. It's actually more leathery than that. And then they also, the males have this dew claw that sticks out here, and that one has a neurotoxin on it. Yes, Australia has managed to weaponize the platypus. As with many things in Australia, it is toxic, poisonous, or downright dangerous. So, with this disarming outlook, and honestly, they are pretty cute, we have to say that the platypus is evil for having that neurotoxin dew claw. I will not test you on that. Now, with the other classes in Mammalia, we have a large amount of differences here. Rodentia, it makes sense, rodents, rodentia, mostly with squirrels, woodchucks on up, mice, rats. I didn't do this in size order, maybe next time. But oddly enough, if you get bit by a mouse, you have to worry about a lot of infections, rats, rat bite fever, uh, bubonic plague, things like that. But apparently, you do not have to worry about rabies, because the woodchuck is a moderate sized creature. Uh, when you're talking about these, it's larger than a squirrel, but it is the smallest animal to have been shown clinically to pass on rabies, which is the most dangerous and most deadly virus for mammals ever, of all time. Kills 99.999% of humans involved. and animals, of course. So the woodchuck is the smallest animal or mammal outside of bats to have shown to pass it on to humans. Bats, of course, can pass it on, but it is not quite clear why we don't see mice, rats, squirrels. Maybe it's because they're fast enough to get away and we haven't had transfer. But so far, so good. Now, it is interesting that usually we think of gnawing mammals, all rodents, and then rabbits, but rabbits are actually in their own class and that or order, and that's why I wanted to point it out. The ones we usually know about are lions, tigers, and bears. Oh my. Dogs, wolves, coyotes, all the way through wolverines. I would rather run into a wolf than a wolverine because wolves, well, they stay away from humans for the most part. Wolverines, they just don't care. There is a large range of not only omnivores, but also full out carnivores here. And it is interesting to note about the behavioral animal behavior of this. Certain of these animals are definitely uh, can definitely be um, civilized or at least able to work with humans, such as wolves and foxes and even coyotes, and the variants of the dogs. But they will have actual physical changes in them after they start uh, being domesticated. And if they stop domestication and stop interacting with humans, they start changing physically as well. And there's some very interesting animal behavior studies over generations involving foxes that have silver foxes that have been domesticated, and they start taking on some less feral characteristics physically too, as well as behaviorally, which is really interesting. Some animals, wolves will stay away from humans. Coyotes work in and around humans, which is a very interesting difference in their animal behavior. We could have a whole class just looking at this order carnivora between dogs, wolves, foxes, and coyotes. That being aside, there is a large area of animals in here, and I mentioned cougars and lynxes. Lynx, they are both found in Wisconsin. Black bears, skunks, weasels, badgers, definitely. There are wolverines in the UP and wolves, of course. And I want to talk about the wolf because that's near and dear to a lot of uh, Wisconsinites and people in the Rocky Mountains and such, where the wolf is always seen as the ultimate apex predator and dangerous and canny and works well in packs. The alpha wolf idea is always the the model of Wall Street, basically. Whereas working by yourself is usually not the best way, and usually not how Americans work. But um, as of 2008, we basically reintroduced timber wolves, and we started tracking them. We're going, oh, there's only like 500 pairs, and then we found out after sampling that there was over 2,000. This is basically where I have our family has hunting land and where I live, and I've personally seen them outside of Marshfield, and the neighbors around our hunting woods will go out on the back of their pickup truck and sit on the road drinking beer and calling them in, getting within 50 feet of them. They stay away from humans. Now, up until now, 2000, like 10 years later, or 10 or 12 years later, basically we've even seen them in the suburbs of Milwaukee and Madison. So their range has extended very, very far in Wisconsin, partially because of so many deer in the area and a plethora of animals. Uh, Overall, they are harmless to humans. They do start preying on farmers' calves and livestock, and so there is a permit to actually take them down if they start harming your um, um, livelihood. We actually had our first hunt in a number of years because our reintroduction of this apex predator, where they had been hunted to extinction, are now it's a very successful program. They are no longer endangered in Wisconsin. They are threatened, which means that we have to keep down their numbers in certain areas so you don't have a huge a spike in wolf populations and then a starvation and then going into uh, a less healthy hunting areas, such as going after farmers, flocks of sheep and cattle and such. But this has been a massively successful program. The only problem is the recently there has been a halt on hunting, a very limited, like 200 tags hunt for these timber wolves because they are endangered in other parts of the U.S. We're not supposed to hunt them here. However, that will cause a massive over reaction in the ecological net of Wisconsin. So a very limited hunt has been reintroduced, given some overly restrictive patterns. And if the Wisconsin DNR, which is extremely careful about what it allows people to hunt, allows people to hunt these predators in a very, very careful amount, it's probably okay in my estimation. Uh, but then again, I am mm, a deer hunter and an avid fowl hunter, but I don't really hunt things for sport. Uh, and I would probably refrain from this. However, I'm not looking down on people who would do this. Now, the interaction map has changed dramatically since 2008. We are definitely interacting with them all the way around, and they've actually been spotted basically in our backyard, as well as I always see coyotes. I've seen fox in our backyard, and somebody has spotted a cougar back there. So it's starting to find as there are fewer and fewer. Um, well, civilization markers in Wisconsin, frankly, and more woodland and more fallow fields are occurring, that uh, nature is taking back over. And whether that be for good or for evil, we are having a population explosion of a major predator, and we can see that in certain parts of Wisconsin. Now, there are many other mammals that I would love to talk about. Pinnipedia, which are the sea mammals, basically, and Cetacea. Between these two groups, we could talk about this forever. They have fascinating um, um, physiological adaptations so that their lungs will actually collapse on purpose once they start diving, because then they have less buoyancy issues and less fighting against that. They also will stop breathing and stay without oxygen for up to, certain whales will do 40 minutes. Porpoises about that long. They can dive down to, some of these whales will go down 1,000 feet, which is well beyond what we can do, as far as I know, with most um, manned submarines. But they have specialized characteristics that will help them survive and allow them to survive not breathing for 40 minutes. We can't really do that easily. Sea lions, 20 minutes, and hunting like that. It is some very fascinating adaptations, and I would strongly connect or suggest that everybody take a vertebrate zoology class and or an animal physiology class, which are one and the same here, and or a marine biology class, because all of these will tell you the wonders of the mammals underneath the sea that are so smart, very, very intelligent animals, as well as all these fascinating developments in order for them to survive in that very harsh environment. And yet, many of the times they are not too different from us in their animal behaviors and their overall behaviors. So it's a wonderful group to a couple orders to look at. We also have some really good examples of the sea lions and seals um, in our zoo at the Milwaukee County Zoo. So I would encourage you to take a look at that. Now, unfortunately, I can't talk about them here. We have a whole number of classes in our anthropology and archaeology classes uh, taught by the adventurous Dr. Ned Farley that talk about the human and the monkeys and primates as they are of those orders. And so therefore, I am not going to talk about them in depth. This is the last lecture that is going to be associated with your tests. Um, I hope you've had a at least interesting time in this class, even though it has not been by any of our plans the greatest way to do this. And I hope and wish you well in your studies in the future in WLC or beyond.